Welcome back. My name is Melissa Faliveno. I'm the associate editor of Poets and Writers magazine. And I'm here today with 4 editors of magazines or presses from the Chicago area or the Midwest. And we're here to talk about those magazines and presses and what kind of work these editors are looking for, and what, working for a small press or a magazine can mean in terms of community to writers.
In terms of what I'm looking for as an editor, I'm looking for work I didn't know I was looking for. And that's the only answer I have to a question about what it is I'm looking for. If I already have an idea about something, it's probably not right for us. If you're doing something that's kind of been done and other people do it really well, it may be very good work, but it may not be right for the audience that poetry has.
You really don't have to sell us with a great cover letter. We read everything. I mean, now we have a lot of stuff to read, which has been freaking me out the last couple of weeks, but don't feel like you have to sell us. I mean, if you meet one of us at a party, and I have to admit, meeting the publishers really does move your stuff along. I'm really embarrassed to say that, but don't think that's not a true thing. If you meet one of us at a cocktail party and you tell us your book's sitting in Submittable, there's a good chance I'll move it along more quickly because you went out of your way to introduce yourself. So I feel a little bad about that, but it definitely happens. But we still get to everything. On the other hand, I will say someone pitched us something just this week and sent literally like a 5 or 7 page pitch letter, which I couldn't understand the first paragraph. And I thought that book immediately dropped in my desire to move it along. I mean, it will get read. Everything gets read, but I thought, this seems absolutely insane to me. What am I going to do when we get to the book itself? I can't even get through the first page.
You all sort of mentioned submissions, and Don, you said 120,000 submissions a year. And then Ben mentioned that submissions have been increasing. And I guess the question that I have is, with what seems like a proliferation of more journals, magazines, presses, MFA programs, do you feel like, because are there more writers out there? Is there more writing coming in now? And maybe because of the proliferation of all of these outlets and programs. And B, does that make your job harder? Is it harder to find good writing because of an influx of submissions, or are you finding more good writing? I mean, are you seeing any connections there, or any correlations?
I don't think there's necessarily more writers out there, just from our perspective in the short time that we've been doing it. I think what has changed is now that everything's electronic and you've got tools like Submittable, and you don't have to send like the self-addressed stamped envelope and print out on the typewriter your cover letter. Like, it's just made it easier for presses and writers to connect. So I think that's what you're seeing. Like, I feel like there was always a lot of people who wanted to write. There was always, before, less avenues to do that in. Now there are just more avenues, so people are finding more places to get published. And once you get published, that's only more, like, that's encouraging. Like, it's like crack almost. Like, you want to do it again and again. Like, before, if you were sending it to a place and you got rejected by 4 places, like, oh, well, that's the only 4 places that are out there, so I guess I'll just quit being a writer. Now there's thousands of places out there, and you can find a place that's relevant to your niche. So there's just more opportunity out there.
I mean, we live for submissions. If I got tired of reading them or found it a burden, I wouldn't be in the right job anymore. But that said, I mean, the only thing to point out is the ease of submissions today through online systems means that it is easier for people to submit bad work. And you should think about that. In other words, always send your best work. I think some people have the idea, which I can understand, that's a bit of a lottery. Well, I'll just keep trying and trying. I'll send everything I have. And I think that's fine. I never tell people not to send work, but I think you need to be your own editor first before you put your work in front of a person, like a real person who's sitting up here. I think people forget that on the other end of something like Submittable, there are people who devote their lives to reading your work. And so, you don't want to just throw things out there.
Read the place that you're submitting to. Try and read, even if it's just like a couple stories. I mean, if they're an online publication, that makes it super easy. But just get an impression of what type of stuff that they publish. Just reading a couple stories from a public, you'll get a really good sense of whether or not your work is a fit If you can see yourself being published in that publication, you'll be able to tell that relatively quickly. And to his point, like that'll go a long way because we can tell, who's read the submission guidelines and who's read the issues because the work feels like it belongs in the magazine. And that not only saves the editor's time, but it saves your time too.
I think as writers, it's a labor of love. I think as people publishing and putting out magazines, it's not typically where you're making the big bucks. It's also a labor of love. And it's very important to us to be respectful to the people who are submitting to us. We want to read the work. We want to handle it respectfully. So if you're reading the magazines, where your work is going to fit. That's always a help. I would say personally for myself, when I was looking to publish the stories I had written in my MFA, I purposely picked only online magazines because I wanted to be Googleable. Like I wanted you to be able to put my name in and read my work and read it multiple places versus being in a print journal that might not make it to a wider audience. If an editor writes you back and says, this is the best advice that I was ever given, and one of my MFA professors gave it to me, is if an editor writes you back personally, you've submitted through Slush, and they say, this isn't it, but I'll read something else of yours, wait until you have something that's worthy of that person to read. Like, don't feel like, oh my God, Adrienne wrote me, I'm gonna send her 3 things right now, even though they might not be done. Like, wait, protect your reputation, protect your work, and wait until you have something that you think will be a fit and that we can create a relationship over. I've worked with a lot of authors that have sent things and they weren't the right fit, and then we were like, that's the right fit.
The beauty of the internet and the submittable and all the things that we're talking about is that there's been a real democratization across publishing. And so we get more good stuff and more diverse authors than we might have gotten 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm really, really proud when you look at each catalog and you look at the history and you think, wow, they look like they represent Chicago or the country. And I think that's really important. We've actually entered, I would say this is informal because I'm saying it out loud for the first time, where people are trying to send stuff that reminds them of stuff we've already published that's really good. And that's awesome. But to Adrienne's point and Don's point, ask yourself if it's as good as the thing we already did, because I also, and this is part of our new approach to being more organized, I supervise a whole group of readers, all volunteers, just to add that. And the other day, this has now happened, I think twice, but definitely just the other day, one of the readers wrote me and said, I think this is good, but it's not as good as X that they clearly thought we would like. And he goes, how can you publish a lesser version of something that's already gotten so much acclaim?
I'm just curious, as writers, how working for magazines and presses has sort of influenced your work as a writer or helped you as a writer, either get your own work published or form a community that you didn't have before.
The best thing I did, which started off somewhat unconscious, and I think it's why I work with Curbside now, is I went out and I found every reading I could and every writer that was friendly and every publisher who was willing to talk. And, I still didn't get published for years, but I slowly built out this network. I didn't have one. I was always I went to social work school. So the social workers are great, but they don't publish books. But what I found was, you can sort of build that network. It may take time. I was very jealous of I started meeting people who'd been in MFAs, and I thought, oh my God, I got this whole thing. I got to figure that out. But that is one of the reasons I ended up at Curbside, because I have always tried to find out whoever I think is interesting or doing something cool. You need to build that. And sometimes I meet people and they seem really stunned when I say it. So I always want to repeat it. You have to build a network because you don't know where and when something's going to happen. I met Jeff because I know Jeff's colleague. I met Jeff's colleague because we had a mutual friend in mind who said, you have to go meet him. And so that became a thing. And now Jeff and I are friendly. Now we meet for coffee, and that's awesome because I love Midwestern Gothic. But I used to love them from afar, and now it's more of a personal relationship.
There's writing, and then there's publishing. So the act of writing, that's very solitary, and you can get people to help you. But publishing encompasses so many other different things. And I think starting a press or helping out at a press, it gives you a view into that process. There's still more writers than publishers, and as a writer, like from an editorial perspective, we're nothing without our contributors. We're a cover and blank pages. But there are a lot of people out there. There are a lot of people that want to get published, as evidenced by the 120,000 submissions that go into poetry. If you're a publisher or associated with a press, now all of a sudden you've got all those people who want to talk to you, because you're technically in a position of power, even though the real secret is that the writing is what's valuable. But the dynamic between publishers and editors is that all the writers want to get published, so they want to go there. So that in and of itself will help you meet a ton of people that you might not have had an angle in onto otherwise. Working on the editorial side gives you an appreciation for like A, what it takes, B, what goes into it. And so if you get rejected, it's not as personal as it was before. There are a multitude of different reasons why something might get rejected or passed on. If we write you back personally, that does mean we legitimately want to see more from you, because there was something that we liked, you almost made it into the issue, and even though this particular story at this particular time wasn't right, like, you should definitely send more. And we've had people who have submitted 8, 9 times. Like, there's another Chicago guy, Richard Thomas. Like, he's phenomenal. He's been published with Stephen King. He's buddy with Chuck Palahniuk. Like, fantastic writer. And we rejected him 6 or 7 times, and then the 8th time he sent us a story, and he's a horror guy, so that's mostly why we didn't publish him. But he sent us something that fit our aesthetic, and we went for it.
Implicit in what everybody's saying is this, that for all the networking you might have the opportunity to do, it won't do you any good if what you're doing doesn't have some kind of real quality to it. One of the advantages for me of doing editorial work and being a writer is I can avoid making the mistakes in my own work that I'm critical of when I read other people's work. And all that tells me is what you've heard many times before, I'm sure, which is you need to sort of read a lot. I mean, network, fine, but know what's out there so that you don't make the kinds of mistakes that an editor's going to see from having read so much. If you guys read as much as we do, you'll know this is a thing that people do over and over again. There's no point in it. Or these are missteps that people make that wreck a piece. And so, before you sort of shake hands and write emails and go to AWP and stuff, you need to attend very carefully and closely to what you're doing, and that requires an awareness of how not to write as well as how to write. And when you get it together like that, you'll have something to show.
It looks like we have time for about one question from the audience. One question.
Do you read blind submissions, or is the first thing you look at the name of the author?
We don't read blind submissions. I want to know, I'll tell you why. I want to know who I'm reading, because I guess a lot of you guys experience something in a binary way: acceptance, rejection. Everybody I've ever published in the magazine was somebody who was rejected before they were accepted, pretty much. So the way it works is my job as an editor is to remember submissions that I read. And so I keep an eye on people. So there's no way on earth I'd read blind. I don't, for my purposes, that would be an unconstructive way to be an editor. And I don't just publish poems, I publish people who write poems. So those things are connected for me. So who you are and what you're doing are very important to me. And so the concept that blind reading might be a kind of fairness doesn't work in my sort of way of doing things. It might be good for contests or other kinds of things. But in terms of my work, I don't read blind, I read with my eyes open, you could say.